March 30th, 2018. I'm in Rodeo, New Mexico with Junior Gomez, who I'm just thrilled to talk to today.
Thank you.
And he has a long, long history here. So we're going to start out. Junior, can you tell us or let us know where you were born, when you were born, and where you were born?
I was born at Animas, New Mexico, and my dad has worked for the railroad, and I was born at the labor's quarters next to the cattle pens in Animas. And of course, after I was born, I was taken to Lordsburg to get registered and all that, you know.
So you were born at home.
I was born at home. Yeah.
And what year was that?
That was in 1937, May 27. Yeah, and so from then, you know, I was pretty small, but we moved over to Rodeo when I was 2 years old. And been here ever since, except for a short period. I went to California to get rich, and it didn't pan out, so we came back, and that's after we were married.
Yeah.
And my big thrills was watching the trains go by, you know, and something that a lot of people in the area never saw or heard.
I'm going to back up a little bit.
Sure.
Because you came here because I read your book.
Yeah.
Because your dad worked for the railroad.
Right.
Do you remember as a kid any stories about your dad told or things that happened during that time?
The first thing that I remember Dad telling me is, see those mountains over there, meaning the Chiricahua Mountains. He said, when he came over here, they were just little sand dunes. Yeah, right. And anyway, well, I just, mainly when I started going to school, I was old enough to remember things. And,
Yes.
and there were a lot of kids in town, and which made it a lot of fun. And I started school here in Rodeo. My first teacher was Mrs. Ruth Strickland, and I remember that Mom got me ready for school, and she really combed my hair back and creased my britches and took me over there. I was scared silly until I got to meet the teacher, and a real nice person, real sweet person. And that we started there. And
Do you have any idea how many people were living here then? You said there were a lot of kids. I mean, just a guess.
it was it varied because we got what they called the extra gang. They were mobile train cars. They were rigged up just like a trailer home, and there was families in them, and they would move them over here, and they would start school, and you know, so the population varied.
So they would be crews coming in then, if I understand.
It's an extra gang.
Yeah, working.
Yeah, and the reason they came in often was when they put the railroad through here. They did it in about a year, all the way to El Paso. Well, they started to Deming and then decided to go to El Paso. And of course, that left the roadbed real soft, you know, and when it rained, well, it had soft spots in it, and the workers always had to be tamping the dirt under the railroad ties, and so there was a lot of work for them for just the gang. There was steady. There were about 6 workers all the time, and plus the signal maintainer and the guy that ran the water department, the water maintainer. And
What did they use the water for?
the water was used for the trains mainly, and then as people started living here pretty permanent, they were putting in gardens and fruit trees and stuff like that. And the demand for the water was a lot higher, and they couldn't keep up with a big tank right next to the depot. So they pushed up a hill, a dirt hill. In 1948, they pushed it up, and they put a big steel tank at the top, and that was auxiliary water for the town.
And they pushed that up because then they gave them gravity.
Gravity, that's it, yeah. And it had a big cement. Some people called it a bunker because that's where the valve was to turn the water off and on.
Uh-huh.
But if I can, when I retired from the school and I moved back to Rodeo, because we were living on the campus at the time, and I met a feller down the street, and he thought I was a newcomer, and they had taken that steel tank down by then, but that cement box was up there. And he said, I was walking towards the store, and he says, see that cement bunker up there? And I said, well, yeah. And he said, well, that's where they used to fight the Indians from. And yeah, I believe that. But that's what it was. It had the gate valve to shut the water off and on. And they had trees lining the highway, big cottonwoods. I've got pictures somewhere. And everybody had their own gardens, had fruit trees, beautiful fruit. They really, of course, the workers had all the water they needed, you know, and didn't have to pay for it or anything. But anyway, the way they pumped the water to the tanks was, there's still one little building left. We call it the pump house. But there were two of them, and it had I don't know what that type of pump was called, but it had a big steel wheel. And the water maintainer would go up there and grab a hold of that big wheel and put his foot on it and turn it and gain momentum.
Yeah.
And then a magneto or something would take over and it would start popping.
Oh.
Pop, 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 and it would go round and round. And that activated a pump jack. And it's just like a windmill does now.
Yeah.
It's got the leathers and stuff go up and down. And I've got a little model right there, and it's got a tower on top. And people asked, why was the tower there? And I said, well, there's an opening in the roof. And when the leathers messed up on the sucker rods, they could just, it had a pulley on top, and it would take the sucker rods out and repair the leathers, but that was pretty slow go. So later they put an engine there, and that's what they ran it out of.
So the trains, were they steam trains?
Yeah, they required the water, and I saw them watering several times. I've got a cement block outside that says stop, and that told the engineers where to stop if they were taking on water, and if they were taking on coal. And I saw trains take on coal a couple of times, is all, but water was pretty regular.
It sounds like for the train, Rodeo was a really important.
About every 50 miles they had water supply and coal. And so this was 50 miles from Douglas, and then 50 miles to Hatchita, and on Columbus, and
What were they? Why did the tracks come through here, Rodeo? Why did they put it in originally?
Mainly because of the smelter in Bisbee, and when that smelter couldn't keep up with the demand, why they built the one in Douglas, that big smelter, and that's where they shipped it to, and then they got overwhelmed with their supply, so they decided to go through here to El Paso.
Oh.
And so in 1902, when the railroad came through, is when they built the depot and water supply and the cattle pens and all that. And
Now, in 1902, like you're saying, if I remember right from what I read in your book, really all that, you don't see much of it left. If I remember right, it was on the other side of Rodeo, on the Chiricahua side of Rodeo. Is that right? Like the train depot and the water and the tracks and everything were over there?
well, the railroad took off from Benson
Okay.
south and went through close to Tombstone,
Yeah.
Fairbank, Naco Junction, Bisbee Junction, Douglas, and then through here. And it instead of taking the coal back up to Benson and then on the north line, this was called the south line,
Okay.
and through Lordsburg's the north line.
Okay.
And
I was just thinking, if I came here in 1902, what would Rodeo have looked like compared to today?
there were ranches scattered around,
Yeah.
and I really can't.
Yeah,
You
but I was
know.
thinking, the town had the big water, is any of it left that you're talking about? The water tank,
The only thing left is that one
yeah,
building towards the store there, and
yeah,
that's the only building left from the railroad.
uh-huh,
And
so,
everything else is gone.
yeah. What do you remember as a kid? Do you have any memories of running around and doing stuff you weren't supposed to be doing, or?
Oh, that was constant. Even if you thought you were doing it right, well, you got skinned. I remember when one time my mom, because we lived in a railroad house, of course, and we lived across from the cattle pens and across the highway from the Rodeo Tavern. And she gave me a couple of nickels and she said, go get you an ice cream and a soda, which was a big treat. We didn't get that real often.
Yeah,
And so I went to the tavern and I got my ice cream. And then they had a nickel slot machine on the bar part. And I was watching some guys put nickels in there and seeing the fruit thing, and that always attracted me, you know. And so I watched them for a while, and when one of the guys quit playing, well, I stuck my nickel in there, watched the fruit go by, and then it stopped, and I started to take off, and then it started making all kinds of noise. And Mrs. McLean was the lady name that was running the place, and she said, "Don't run off, aren't you gonna get your money?" And I said, "Money?" And she said, "Yeah, you won some money." So I went back, and there was $2 worth of nickels. So my little pocket was bulging, and I was all proud. I went home, and I thought Mom would be real happy. She said, "I didn't send you to gamble." So I lost all my money, but I enjoyed my ice cream cone. But that's one of the
Yeah.
items. And used to be a barber shop just down the road, and Clarence Russell was the man's name. His wife's name was Maud, and he had a barber shop and had a grocery store, and it's that RV place now. And so we used to go there and buy our candy and stuff, and
Did you get your hair cut there, or did your mom do it?
got the haircut there. And old Barber loved to, we called him Barber,
Yeah.
and he loved to cut hair. And you'd get up there and sit down on the chair, and he'd pump it up and
Yeah.
raise you up and put that white cloth on you, and then he'd turn his clippers on and take off half your head, and he said, "How do you want it?" Well, do I have a choice?
It's a little late now. You
Have
remember
it.
how much a haircut cost?
I don't remember it.
Yeah,
It was pretty cheap compared to now, you know.
yeah,
In fact, my dad and I, when they had the they call them contractors. What were they called? People from Mexico would get contracted to come pick cotton or whatever, and there was a lot of them around here did agriculture work, and Dad was always out to make a nickel. Of course, he had a big family to raise, and he had a set of clippers, the mechanical type, click, 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 and then he had an electric pair, and he said, "Come on, let's go make some money." Okay. So we'd go down, there was a house over there where, I don't know, there were at least 20 guys lived, and if they didn't live there, they knew they were going to get a haircut, so they'd go over there, and I'd take one head, and he'd take another, and we'd, I don't know, he charged a quarter or something like that. And it was real money, too,
Yeah.
and so
Uh,
we gave a lot of haircuts, and
uh,
they didn't complain. So, but yeah, just remembering the thunderstorms that would go through here, and thunder and lightning, and you could hear the water actually running out of the Peloncillo Mountains. I mean, it was roaring. It rained, and it would come down through here, and then Dad would get his raincoat and his rain hat and take off to the motor car house, Casa de Carrucha we called it, and you could hear them put through here, and the reason they went out was to keep a watch on all the washers, arroyos, and all that.
because of the train?
Because of the rain,
Yeah.
and a lot of times the trash would pile up there and dam up the water, and it made it dangerous for the trains to go through.
Yeah.
And so I remember that, and they went out several times. It was scary watching the lightning hitting all around the motor car, but they were happy because there was more money, overtime.
Overtime. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Were there any, when you were growing up and around here, were there any fires because of lightning strikes?
There were several, but there was people here that would gather whoever they could and go help fight the fires. I never did go do that.
Yeah. Let's see. You have other memories of being here as a kid, growing up, school memories?
Not really.
Uh-huh.
I was kind of a loner, and I kept to myself, which is good. I was mainly up in the mountains just walking around and stuff.
I was going to ask you, as a loner, did you kind of roam around?
Well, yeah, and the reason I was a loner, I had 6 sisters. So that's why that was why I was always hunting. Had the slingshots, had a different name then, but I won't say what it was. And when they built that steel tank in 48 up on top, of course in 48 I was 11 years old, and I'd go up there, and where they would cut the rivets, they would leave a little piece of steel down there, so I'd fill my pockets up with that. I would go rabbit hunting, and I would kill a snake and open it up, see what was inside, and stuff like that. I was just
Cool. Interested.
yeah, that was me, and my nature, but
Did you ever find any really interesting Indian artifacts?
Oh, yeah.
What kinds of?
well, a lot of writings and paintings and stuff like that. Some I could almost tell what they were saying by the picture. Some didn't make sense, but they were pretty.
Yeah.
And as you can see, I've got arrowheads that we found way back there, and I've got them all around. my children all have frames that I've made for them, and
Yeah,
so
gorgeous. We'll look at those.
so
So you roamed around. That was a good thing.
yeah, oh yeah,
I mean,
and you know, I guess you read about my holy shoes, and
I don't remember. I'll be honest.
well, well, of course we couldn't get a pair of shoes except maybe twice a year at the most. So we did what we could with what we had, and besides hand-me-downs, you know, and you had a hole in the bottom, you'd get a piece of cardboard and outline your shoe or boot and cut the cardboard and put it inside and put your foot in, and you could go another few miles. But being on the swings, you know, you had to drag your feet, and so they didn't last long. And I tried different ways to do that, and one of the kids here said, "Man," I was telling him about that, and he said, "At least you had some kind of sole." He says, "One of my boots just covered the top of my foot." He said, "Didn't even have sole." And so, but we had a lot of hand-me-downs, and you know, the folks tried what they could, and
Did your mom, your family, have like fruit trees, orchard? Did she can a lot of things, grow a lot of?
my dad always had a big garden, and we had one big peach tree, and the neighbor, which was the signal maintainer, he was taking care of a place just across from the tavern. He had plums, peaches, pears, you name it, beautiful fruit, a lot of grapevines, and they all produced beautiful. One of my uncles right here at the old section house, which used to be right across from here, across the street, and he grew some little bit of alfalfa, and he had some fruit trees and a big garden, and so
It sounds like they should have named it Paradise here to me.
it was paradise. You know, it was paradise to us,
Yeah,
and we loved being in rodeo.
because of it just sounds like I mean that it sounds like here you are, you got beautiful scenery because the scenery is the same.
Right.
You got all this wonderful fruit. You
Yeah.
get to roam around and find
Oh,
all
yeah.
kinds of cool stuff.
You bet. Yeah. But, you know, it's different than being a grown-up. You don't have the worries that your parents did, you know.
Yeah, and today, the kids that grow up in big towns and that the parents don't let them go roam around anymore.
Right.
They're worried about them all the time.
We had some good kids around. Some of them would get in trouble once in a while. I was talking to some people the other day, and like the pot, marijuana, and stuff like that.
Yeah,
I never even knew
yeah,
what it was
yeah.
until, I worked at the school for 26 years, and then I started hearing kids getting in trouble, and one of them said, one of them even had a bong. What in the world is a bong,
Yeah.
Well, they knew what they were talking about. I didn't.
Yeah.
But you'd go into the bathrooms, and once in a while a kid would smoke pot, and you could smell that.
Yeah.
And but life was pretty innocent. You were
Yeah.
living in an environment that we were living in. It was a good, clean life.
I was just going to ask about that. Even though we might look at that today and say, "Oh, you were poor."
We didn't know it.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
didn't know it, and you wouldn't agree with that, right?
No, we wouldn't. Later on, working at school at Animas, we had what they called hands across the border, and I always drove the bus for activities, and we got to go into Mexico through Agua Prieta back in there, and that reminded me, the people there, they were poor, but they didn't know it. And that's how we were. You know, anything they get, they appreciate, you know. And late in the years after working at school, the kids would get an apple or orange and they'd take it out and plaster it against the wall, you know, or, you know, stuff like that. They really didn't appreciate stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it's a different life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And good kids, they just
They don't appreciate it.
didn't appreciate it. So
What was it like growing up with how many sisters? 5?
6 sisters.
6 sisters. What was that?
That's why I spent a lot of time up in the mountains. Yeah, and I've got stories of the mountains that, you know, I probably saw stuff that most people haven't seen up there.
Can you tell me any of those?
Well, the caves that I would find,
Yeah.
the old steels that were still up there, you know, and because when Arizona had a prohibition,
Okay.
they a lot of guys put up the steels, and they did quite a business, and because Arizona was dry, Paradise was dry, and all the miners wanted, you know, some booze, and so they would come to rodeo. And I've got a letter put up that I asked a friend of mine. I said, would you tell your mom to write me something about what she saw in rodeo when she first arrived? And so she answered back, and she tried to get her brothers to write something, and they couldn't at the time. They weren't up to it. But when she came to rodeo in 1914, she had 3 or 4 kids. I don't remember now, but it's in the letter. And she came by train into rodeo, and there were 17 saloons, hotels, all together, you know, and she didn't say so many saloons, so many hotels, but it was a real active town. And
That would have been before your time?
1914, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, thank goodness.
So when you were growing up, there wasn't all the saloons and everything?
The Silver Dollar Bar and the Rodeo Tavern, that's what there was. And we went to the Silver Dollar Bar. I went with my dad, and I would get a soda, and they had a little old tube like that with peanuts. Sometimes it would have a penny inside, and that's what I would do with my Coke, but Dad would drink his beer. But the counter, they had cut a hole on top, and it was full of silver dollars. I mean, the old silver dollars.
Yeah.
And the story that I had heard on that bar, and I can't get anybody to verify it or dispute it, it came from Manitou Springs, Colorado, to Hatchita, stayed there a while, and then they closed that bar and it came to rodeo. And from rodeo it went back to Hatchita, and last I heard it had gone back, but I'm not sure. I haven't gone to see the bar at Hatchita, but that's the story I had. But we had a Boy Scout meeting in there one time, and that was the last time I had gone in there, but a lot of the silver dollars were missing already, and so.
So you got to do scouts when you were a kid?
Oh yeah, yeah.
No, I don't know why. I guess I knew they were around.
We had a man by the name of Bob Jarvis. His mom and dad used to drive the school bus from rodeo to Animas, and he gathered a bunch of boys, and we joined a scout troop, and we'd take trips up in the mountains. And this one time, I guess you've heard of that landing field between here and Animas. It was an auxiliary landing field, and
No.
we had 3 fellers here that that worked it because they had a 3-shift going on over there. And we went to the old CC camp. You know where that is?
I know the one up in,
After, no, this one, as you turn off on the Animas Road,
okay,
you turn off there and there's some water diversions, I guess, or dikes, whatever you want to call them,
uh-huh,
around there. And of course, it was all ruins already. And we hiked all the way from here to there.
whoa,
And we had our backpacks and
whoa,
our all that liniment, whatever it's called,
Yeah.
stinky stuff, and we were real proud of that. But anyway, I had a sleeping bag, and I made a little hole in the side of the embankment, and I stuck my sleeping bag in there, and I figured it'd be real comfortable. So went to sleep, and then a thunderstorm came, and mud was coming down on my face and everything, and so I pulled out real quick, and everybody else was getting up, and Bob Jarvis said, "Let's go up to the airport," we called it, and he says, "Get in some shelter." So we walked up there, and Mr. Land was the operator at the time, and he invited us in, and where he worked, where his office was, he had a room in the back, and had some bunks back there, bunk beds. And so we went in, cleaned up, and had a little bit of sleep. He got off about 1, I believe, that night. And then he brought us home. But that was our biggest experience.
was that, so that was really an airport?
Yeah, it was a landing field, yeah.
Oh, can it,
It had a name, and I don't remember, some kind of auxiliary
yeah,
field.
who would land there, was it, I mean,
I saw 2 airplanes land in my lifetime. That was it.
yeah,
And one of them, I know they spent the night there. They were having problems, and so they spent the night and got it fixed next day. But the landing field had, and I've got one of those cones sitting out here, and the whole perimeter had those cones, and it had light on top. And of course, they had their big generators, and they'd fire them up. They kept one going for daytime, and then they'd fire up another one for night because they had all the lights. And it looked like a big city over there. And when my wife came in, because her stepdad was a well driller. And what year was that? Do you remember, hon?
51.
In 51. And he was hired to drill a well for one of the farms across Arizona, into Arizona. And when she was coming down here for the first time, her mom told her, "Well, the way you'll find where we're staying, we'll leave a light on in the porch." And coming from Santa Monica, she thought, "Well, how am I going to know which porch, which light?" And so she came by train to Lordsburg, and then caught the Greyhound. We had a Greyhound through here. It went each way every day. She caught the bus coming down here, and it was dark. And she came off Granite Gap, and she saw all the lights. She said, "Well, rodeo's not that little. How am I going to find?" And the bus kept coming by and passed all the lights. And that was the airport, what we
yes,
call the
yes,
airport.
yeah, I understand.
It kept coming by, and she came up over the overpass that used to be over here, and came into rodeo. There was one light under a porch, so she knew where to get off at. And
Now, for a guy that, why was there one light?
just to let her know
Yeah,
where to get off. I mean, we had a power plant, and the tavern had, that's where the house was. The tavern had 2, you know where the real estate office is? Well, there used to be another one next to it. And they had their own generator too, and everybody else had coal oil lamps and stuff like that.
Yeah, so see,
And-
there wasn't electric lines running through here.
Finally, yeah, about that time they started coming in. There was a feller by the name of Ray Eddington set up his own power plant. And of course, like everybody says, Mom would plug in her electric iron and you could hear the generators, you know, but have you seen that boat south of Rodeo
Yes, I have.
before you get to
Yes.
the landfill?
And I've wondered, why is there a boat? out
That's one of the boats that were right here behind his generator. It was a big barn's what it was. He had two generators and they were getting hot. The radiator wasn't pulling in enough. So he put two boats out there, filled them up with water, and he ran a line and just coiled them up inside the boats. And as they went through, they would cool off and go back through the engines, and that's how they kept cool. But anyway, see, that's where I first met my wife, and after she came down to visit her mom and her stepdad. She was just well, we were both kids.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I'm
how
too-
old were you?
I'm 2 years older than she is.
Yeah.
She was, how old were you? 12, 13?
12 when I first came to Rodeo.
Yeah, 12.
Yeah.
And I don't know, we just pretty much hit it off then, you know.
Yeah,
And when Mom and Dad would get their paycheck, I was already going to school at Animas, but I would drive her to Douglas and to get groceries and stuff. And I used to go visit the school, just show off, you know, coming from the big school, you know. And we were sitting there and in the class, they let me in, and they were showing they had a screen up on the wall, and they would flash numbers or pictures or something, and the kids would have to remember what they saw just in an instant. And they were doing that, and I saw her staring at me, and so I looked at her, and then I'd look again. She was still staring at me, so I winked at her. That's all it took. After that, I was sitting next to her, and that's where it started. And,
how old were you guys then? How old were you, would you think?
well, I guess I must have been 15, maybe
Yeah.
14, somewhere. around.
And the other thing, you were going to school in Animas, and your wife was going to school down here.
She started down here. Yeah.
What was this, was there an elementary school here, and then you went to high school?
There's a lady by the name of, oh gosh, the school's still there.
Oh, the
but she-
Apache school.
No, right here
Oh,
in Rodeo. And then later, the enrollment went up due to the farming that came in and the extra gangs. And so they built another school just across the street from the post office. And they built that one. And then it only went for a couple of years, and then they shut them down, and everybody was going to Animas then.
oh, why did they do that? There were fewer.
Not enough kids. Not enough kids. And
I sort of cut you off. The best part of the whole story is, well, what happens after you're 15? You're sitting next to your future wife, and what did you guys do after that? When did you get married? And,
let's don't get too personal.
okay.
But,
Yeah, you're right. That didn't sound. That wasn't good.
but anyway, yeah,
Did you go to high school together?
that was 60 years ago,
Yeah,
almost 61 years ago. No, I graduated in 55.
55.
She graduated in 57.
And when did you guys get married?
In 57, late 50,
Yeah.
August 57,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
She had gone back to Santa Monica. She was living with her grandma, and one of her friends that she had met here at the school at Animas was living in Wilcox. And she let me know that she was going to be there, so I went to visit her. And I told her, well, you're not going back. And so we went to Douglas. I rented her a room at the Gadsden Hotel. And I said, I'll be back in the morning. And so I came home, and I told Mom about Grace. She knew Grace. And of course, I told her we have to get married right away. And she she thought, oh, we better get it done. But it wasn't that. It's
Yes.
just she didn't want to go back.
Yeah.
And so I went after Grace, came home, and Mom and Dad were ready to go to Silver City. We had to get our blood tested and stuff like that. And it was on a Saturday. And if you knew Mom, when she wanted something done, she got it done, you know. And they told her, well, the blood testing won't be done for a couple of days. She said, no, you can do it. There's bound to be a way. So they did it right away, and it tested good. So we came back to Lordsburg, and we got married by JP. That was August 31st in 57. And by then I was already working for the railroad as a telegraph operator.
How did you get that job?
I guess I thought I knew it all, and we
Well, yeah, young guy, you did know.
I knew there was an opening for telegraph operators, and you had to be able to type so many words per minute. And so a friend of mine from Animas and I got together, and we went to El Paso and took our tests, and we passed it. And so
But how did you learn it? Did you teach yourself?
Telegraphy was going out about the time that I got the job. I knew just a little bit of telegraphy, but mainly we had a headset that we wore and did it by phone. The dispatcher in El Paso kept track of all the trains, east and west, and he would say, like, train number 44, meet train so-and-so coming this other way, and train so-and-so takes siding at Animas or wherever.
Yeah.
And that gave this one the right of way, you know. And so we had to repeat the orders to make sure that they were correct, the time and everything. And we would roll them, it was onion paper,
Yeah.
the forms,
Yeah.
and we made 4 copies, one for the engineer, one for the conductor, and then we kept 2. And we would roll them up, and they called them hoops, and it came from the first ones that they made, which were hoops. And these they opened up, they were spring-loaded, and when you put the train orders in the string, tighten them up, you would run it through the arms, which would close them down. They had little hooks. And then you would go out and hang them on a post out there for the train. And the engineer would go by, and he would stick his arm out
Oh,
and put it through the hoop, through the string.
right.
And he'd take it in, and then he'd open it up and read it.
So they were still moving then when they did
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So
They slowed down, obviously, or something.
Not too much.
Really?
And then the conductor, of course, he's lower, you know, and
Uh-huh.
he'd reach out there and grab his.
Wow, so then they're still rolling, and
Yeah.
when they get their orders, they read
That's
it.
how we used to get the mail too.
How was that same way, the mail?
They were big canvas bags,
Yeah.
and,
Oh,
and the train, if they happened to have to stop, they'd just kick it out, you know.
Yeah.
But if they didn't have a recent stop, they'd kick it out. And there was just one time that I remember the suction of the air
Yeah.
from the train sucked one of them in and scattered mail all the way to the overpass. And there was one at Animas that scattered mail. That one was bad because it was about the first of the month, you know.
Oh,
It had
checks.
Social Security and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, and
So here you are, how old were you when you got your job?
well, that was after I graduated. I was
18?
18, going on 19, I guess.
So you're a young guy, got a real, I would assume that's a really good job.
That's a good paying job at the time, you
Yeah,
bet. But the problem was I was at the bottom of the seniority.
yeah,
And so I was doing relief
yeah.
jobs mainly, which I liked because I got to do jobs that the agents were doing because I would replace them when
Yeah,
they'd get sick or
yeah,
go on vacation or whatever. I would take their place.
yeah.
Yeah, I worked all the way from Fairbank, Arizona through Bisbee Junction, Douglas, Rodeo, and all the way to Tucumcari.
Yeah,
And
wow.
I was on the move all the time,
Huh.
which I enjoyed it. I was young, didn't
Yeah, yeah.
drove a good car, got paid good.
And you guys, where did you live? You got married, you have a job, where were you living?
We lived at the old water maintainer's house
Yeah,
for a while,
uh-huh,
and then we just wherever I was working at, the different places, you know.
yeah,
And I've been there, done that.
yeah.
If you read the back of my book, you can see what all I've done and everything. And
Yeah,
but
that must be, there you go again, I'm thinking, what a great life, or start of a great life. You know,
Hey.
you're married, you're young, you got an energy, and you,
can't complain.
no, and you got a good job,
Yeah.
wow. Yeah,
Yeah, and then I started playing the guitar, and Dad had bought a guitar from some guy that he liked his wine, you know, and he needed the money, so he gave him $2 for it. And I would take my guitar to the cattle pens across the tracks and serenade the cows, and they'd just look at me like, "What's this guy trying to prove?" You know. But then this one man, they called him Turkey. His name was Estorgio, and he used to do rock work, adobe, lay adobes, plaster. At the time, it was plaster, not stucco. You know, he mainly plastered with cement, and now stucco is.
stucco.
You don't know what different materials
Yeah,
they.
yeah.
I don't know, but anyway, that's where I started, because that guy could play the guitar,
I see.
and I would watch him and watch him and watch him, and that's where I learned how to play. Mom knew one chord, and I learned that chord from her, and then, well, if you can see in my book, I went on and I played for dances, and I did the cowboy poetry tours, and that one took me several places. And I used to do the Rex Allen Days in Wilcox and Silver City several times, and went all the way to Durango, Colorado, and
Wow.
did my thing up there.
When you played for dances, was it just you, or was it some other people you played with?
I had my brother, brother-in-law, and a cousin, and that's where I got started.
What were the other two instruments?
I played the guitar,
Yeah,
and we had the bass, the drums, and I guess another guitar. Had to be, and we'd go from there. Later, I changed people in the band because we moved, you know, and back to Animas, and I got tired of I was in a groove. I was playing the lead, and I got tired of doing the same thing. So I thought, well, there's got to be a different sound, And the other guys were learning all the time that we were playing, because they were learning from me. Well, I wasn't a musician, but we made people dance, and so I picked up a harmonica, and I added that to it, and that went over good. So that's what I used later on, and I put the harmonica on the holder and play the guitar at the same time, and then later from that I picked up the fiddle, and I could play the drums, the bass, anything,
You're a talent,
And well,
a musician.
it's just something that you do, And people ask, well, where did, like my wood carvings, how did you do that? I don't know. I just get a piece of wood and take the outside off, and there the figure is, and that's all I can say. And
Do you, now that you're mentioning that, I'm curious, do you have an idea and then find a piece of wood, or do you find a piece of wood and then get an idea?
I have an idea, but I don't always end up with what I start
Yeah,
with, because if you have a mistake, well, then you change
yeah,
a little bit. And
yeah.
I did my figures, my little people, and then later on I put them in a little scene. And I used to tell my kids, because they're old, those carvings, and I used to tell my kids, when you guys go to bed at night, those people jump off the shelves and start running around doing things. So for a long time they'd get up, and the people weren't moving, so they kind of gave that up, and it's like they started out with pet rocks,
Yeah.
They'd paint something, and I used to have one and put it on a little bit of sand or gravel, and I painted it, and I said, this guy doesn't eat much and doesn't drink water, and the kids go up there and pet it. But it was a lot of fun. I used to play country and western and Mexican music, and I just mix it up in my dances, and everybody enjoyed them. And
Yeah.
I know when we played here at the tavern, we would get students from the research station.
Uh-huh.
They would come down to the dances, and they really enjoyed it.
Uh-huh.
They didn't know what the music was, but they were dancing. They were having fun.
Uh,
A lot of fun. Yeah, like I say, I've been there, done that. I don't regret any of it.
yeah.
So,
And then, when you were working at the school, you guys were living in Animas?
yes,
Most of the time, were you living in Animas when
Well,
you
I
were
was-
raising your family? Or?
I was farming, and
Oh,
it didn't really pay off, and I needed to supplement our pay, so I got the job at the school.
yeah,
That was in 1976,
yeah,
and I started working there, and I worked there for 26 years.
wow,
And that was about the time the smelter went in, and Animas had the biggest enrollment of students that ever.
I didn't know there was one.
Yeah, yeah, and so I was a busy guy, and
Was it the same thing? They were bringing ore or rock from Bisbee? What were they?
no, they were bringing it in from Morenci up that way
Yeah,
in Arizona.
yeah,
They'd ship it over here and smelt it here at Plias, and then ship it out to El Paso. Dad was always saying, because when they would get a big load of marijuana or whatever drugs, they would burn them at the smelter.
oh,
And he'd say all the druggies used to like to go stand downwind from the stacks. But
so did you live more, when you were raising your family, most of that time, you were over in Animas working there then?
yeah, most of the time, I tried different jobs.
Uh-huh.
I'm one of those guys that does something and after a while it kind of gets boring.
Or, yeah, I'm like
But as
that
long
too.
as I could support my family, why
Yeah.
would change jobs.
Yeah.
There was a portable sawmill up above Rustlers Park, and I worked it for about 3 months, and I love the smell of lumber,
Yeah.
and so we really enjoyed it. We lived in a cabin up there just below Rustlers, belonged to a friend of ours. He had it leased, and so we got to stay there, and I didn't have too far to go to work.
Do you remember about when that was?
It, Rustlers was like 81,
Oh,
more or less.
so 1981. Why were they just cutting trees or milling it?
It was a portable sawmill, and we were cutting lumber for the Bisbee mines, and it was they wanted 2x10s, or if we could get them bigger, but nothing smaller than 2x8s. We used to load those trucks up, and it would have a steep climb and then a steep drop off right before you got to the ranger station at Rustlers, and then you got to Onion Saddle, and it has a sharp turn. We had one truck go off right there, and then down further there was another one that went off. But they were really loaded, but that's where they were headed, to the Bisbee mines.
Just along that line, do you know when they put the railroad line in, it would be before your time, but you might know? I thought I read somewhere they were cutting timber up there for the railroad, I can't think of what.
Well, the timber was for the trains, really for the engines,
Oh,
instead of coal.
right.
We had an Indian wood chopper that was doing that at, you know where Chiricahua is? The other side of
Yeah,
Apache that way.
yeah.
He would bring in a lot of wood down below, and the railroad would pay him for that. He had stacks and stacks of that wood. And
So they were burning it to boil the water to
Yeah,
get the steam, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
but he did a lot of that. And then later on, when they started using a lot of coal, he was chopping wood for just about everybody around here. He was camped out one time. His name was Nacho Flores. He was all Indian out of Mexico. And he would come down to rodeo sometimes with his burro and sometimes just walking. And he would leave his burros at camp, and he'd bring a gunny sack, and he'd buy a bottle of booze and get plaster for 2 or 3 days, and then he'd fill up his gunny sack with tobacco and coffee and that stuff. And then he would get one of us to drive him back to Portal. And the last place I took him was where the creek crosses, and I don't know if the road's called Pugsley Road,
I've heard that name,
but anyway,
Doc Pugsley,
yeah,
yeah.
back in there he got to camp, and he would call, "Hey, burro!" And of course it would echo, and you could hear a bell start ringing. And he had his lead burro hobbled so he wouldn't run off, real far. And then the other burros would follow the lead. And anyway, he came into camp one day, and a bear went in and started messing with his burros. And he did the best he could to run that bear off. And so he picked up a log with fire on it, and he started beating on the bear. And that bear went across the stream to Pugsley's house. And Pugsley had a screened-in porch. And he had just canned a bunch of stuff, and the bear could smell that stuff. And he kept going to the porch, and Pugsley came out and he shot the bear. And then later the bear's rug was in his bedroom. And the reason I know that is that we'd get a cold or whatever, and Mom would always take us up there to get a penicillin shot from Pugsley. Pugsley had a whetstone. I think it was bigger than the whetstones here. He would get his needle and sharpen it. And then he would either light a match or dip it in alcohol, fill it up with the penicillin, and usually on your butt.
Yeah.
And you could feel the skin pushing way in there, and
Yeah.
it finally popped through. And then, but it helped us, and
Yeah.
they always asked me if I was allergic to penicillin or anything. Well, I couldn't tell them because we always had welts where where the needle would go in, and but that's the last camp that Nacho had, and from there, some people by the last name of Colmar took him into their ranch on the way to Whitetail Canyon. They had the bar here, and they took him in and had a little old shack down below their house, and they put a bunch of food and stuff for him to live in and to live on, and they went over there one morning and couldn't find Nacho, and they saw a little bit of smoke coming up from down the canyon, and there Nacho was with his tent, and he couldn't live in the house,
Oh.
and so after that he got pretty sick, and he ended up at Fort Bayard, and that's where he passed away. And I don't know why Fort Bayard, because that's a military hospital.
Oh, I was just gonna ask.
And but he was talking to Mom one time, and I was listening, and he said that when Miles and all of them were after Geronimo, that I think he scouted for him, and anyway, he was telling us one time about where he saw some fires. There was a camp. Of course, that was west of Apache. We went over there, and of course, we were always looking for arrowheads. And there was a big encampment. There's a big spring right there. And but I always wonder if he was inducted into the cavalry or, but we looked throughout the cemetery and we couldn't find his grave.
After you were working up at Rustler, what did you do next?
We came back to Cotton City and started working for farmers. And then later, I started working with a man by the name of Jim Rieger. And what he was doing was pulling up the irrigation pumps and servicing them and putting them back in. And I did that with him for quite a while, and just worked with farmers. And
What were they raising? What kind of crops? Or
cotton.
Cotton. Pretty much all cotton around?
Pretty much. And then later they started raising the maize, the Milo maize.
Yeah.
And of course now they went to chili and corn and that kind of stuff.
What happened to the cotton? You don't see it hardly.
It was getting too expensive to farm, and it wasn't producing the way it used to. The grounds were a lot healthier, and they could grow most anything, and they get worn down just like a person, But that's what I did. I worked for quite a few farmers around. I tried it on my own and worked good for a while, and then it just got too expensive.
Yeah.
Too expensive.
Yeah, hard to make a living.
Yeah, that's when I started working for the school.
Yeah. But going way back, I wanted to ask you if you ever got the chance, maybe when you were young, did you ever ride the train through here?
Oh yeah, several times. We used to go to El Paso several times, and Dad used to like to go over there to see the bullfights and the ball games and stuff in Juarez. And we would ride there, and we'd get off at the depot, and there was a bar right up the street, and they always served chili beans. And Dad used to love to stop there and eat chili beans and drink his beer, and then we'd go on to Juarez. And after we saw the ball game or bullfight, we'd come back and we would sleep in the depot on the benches. And you know what was confusing at that time? The bathroom said whites only. And I look at me, well, what in the world am I, you know? And no blacks allowed in those bathrooms, and I guess they had separate bathrooms. And I saw Hispanics going in the whites' bathroom, so that's where I was going. And didn't get kicked out, so I guess it was all right. But we would sleep on the bench and catch the train, come back to rodeo. I had two sisters, one in California and one in Oregon, and Mom would pack a big old lunch, and we would get on the train here and go all the way up there. We didn't have to pay. Dad worked for the railroad. He had the free pass, and we would feed on those burritos or whatever she packed, you know, fried chicken and stuff like that. On the way up there, the comics were a nickel, I think, and there was a big newsstand, so I'd go over there, and the other kids would tell me, "No, don't buy that one. I bought that one," and then we'd trade later. So, so we read comics all the way up there. But yeah, we slept on the trains quite a bit on trips. And
How long a ride is it, or was it, to El Paso?
to El Paso,
Yeah, from here. Yeah.
let's see, probably a little over 2 hours,
Yeah.
around 2 hours.
Yeah, so that's not bad.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a pretty good railroad too.
definitely.
You know, this was Mom's world, you know, rodeo. And people would ask her, maybe in California or somewhere, "Where are you from?" "I'm from rodeo." "Rodeo? Where's that?" "You don't know where rodeo is?" She thought everybody should know where rodeo was.
Yeah.
But she got to meet a lot of friends. And then later we have a sister in Bishop, California. And used to go up there.
Did you ever, I was curious if you ever saw mountain lions in your day?
Not over there. Over here, yeah. Not more than a couple of times. They saw you before
Yeah.
you could see them.
Yeah.
I saw one at Granite Gap, had two little cubs cross one time, but up here I was sitting at the canyon. I was one of those, they say it's the artist in you, you know. You listen to the sounds and look at the sights and just listen to the birds and just sit there and take it all in. And sat there for quite a while, and pretty quick I heard a rock roll across the canyon, and it was a clumsy lion because they don't usually make any noise. And he started moving, and that's when I saw him. He'd been watching for a long time, but I know they were up there, and I spent a lot of time at the Dunnigan Ranch, just over the mountain, and my wife and I went fishing up there, and I was always looking for arrowheads, and I wasn't catching anything, so I went walking, and I saw where something had been dragged. What in the world? And then I saw a big old lion track. It was pulling something, so I went where it had come from. I wasn't going to go the other way. And he had fought a deer and you could see where the battle took place. The antlers would hit the ground, and his feet would drag, and finally the lion killed him, and he dragged him on the side of an embankment like that, and there was a washed out place where the deer dropped down in there, and he pulled him out. That's how big the lion was. He was strong. Went over the rice, and there were two big old cedar trees, and between the cedar trees was a mesquite bush, and he headed for the middle of the trees, and so I kind of circled it, and then I could see where he had gathered up a bunch of trash and tried to cover a deer. He put that deer right in the middle of that bush, and I saw the antlers, and it was a big sized buck. And so I got out of there. I wasn't going to stay there too long, and later I told my friend about it, and he went over there and he tried to trap it, but he couldn't get it, and finally another rancher trapped it. But
Where would you guys go fishing?
when I worked with the Dunnigans, they were building those dams on their own, across the canyons, and I helped them with a couple of them, and there was a farm. You wouldn't know where Goat Camp Road is. Okay. There was 3 ponds there. It was a farm, and they kept those ponds full of water all the time, and there were bass and catfish and perch and stuff, and I'd go down there and catch them and put them in barrels, and then I'd take them up here and dump them out. And of course my friend there was a fish truck that would sell fish at Cotton City, at Adams, and he would buy some and put them up there. And they were really good fishing up there. And people started finding out about it, and they kind of ruined it. Let's see how many they could pull out, and started trashing the place out. And so he finally locked the gates, and for them, he never locked them for me. And I used to take Mom and Dad and the kids up there and go fishing, but that's where the fish came from. Yeah. And I guess they're still in there. In fact, I have, one of these days I'm going to go to the ranch up there, and they have a pond right there at the ranch. And I know there's big fish in there, and I've got just to relax. And maybe take a grandkid or two.
Somewhere in your book, I can't remember how you said it, but got the impression that the Palencias are really something special.
They are. I always felt like they were my mountains. Go anytime, do whatever. Nobody bothered you. The ranchers, if they saw you up there, so what, And so I got to explore everything. I used to go deer hunting, and of course looking for arrowheads and stuff. And I always felt like the Indians must have felt when they were getting run out, and that's how I thought about them. People started moving in, which is fine, they've got a right to. They buy the property, that's their property. And what got me, we went down the gas line road and then took a little road up. We were going to go deer hunting, my sons and I. And we come to a gate, and here comes 3 riders. I can identify them now. I know who they are. And I said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Well, we're going to go deer hunting." I told them where we were going. I said, "Well, this is private property now." Okay. And So I said, well, we'll go back, and said, well, how'd you get up here anyway? And I said, well, I took the road that I've been taking for years. There's a road. Yeah, you get up there and it's a whole new world up there. You're free and you can, you don't do any damage. You just listen and look. And then you saw how people lived or used to live. And that was really some life. And I saw how people used to try to make a living through wither steels, and I've got a coiled pipe out here I can show you later. And, and all that freedom is taken away from you. But like I say, it's their property. They've got a right to keep everybody out, whoever they want. And some people take it wrong that I don't like newcomers. It's not that. It's just what's happened. But like they say, it's the artist in you. I can sit up there and you listen to the birds, and they don't care whether anybody's listening or not. They're going to do their own thing. And sometimes I think, well, a person ought to be like that, You want to do something, you do it if it's right. And if it makes you happy, well, you go for it. And that's how the birds are, way up in the middle of nowhere, and they're chirping and making noises. And then like, you get to see things that people don't see around here, I was going deer hunting and I could feel like something was following me or something. I'd look around and I didn't see anything, and I'd keep going, and I had that feeling. Finally, I looked back like that, and there was a coatimundi coming up in the creek, and he was just curious of where I was going, I guess, and he finally left. And I saw a bobcat doing what house cats do, playing with a mouse and stuff like. Big old bobcat. He didn't know I was watching him, and when he finally sensed that somebody was watching him, he just crept off. And I've seen deer doing things that you miss out on. There was, just up the canyon here, there was a doe, and people used to have the sheep fences, that mesh wire at the bottom, because people had a lot of sheep, and they had to have that kind of wire to keep them from. And that doe got scared, saw me, and took off running, and had a little fawn following it. And she jumped the fence, which easy, and the fawn couldn't do it, kept hitting that fence. And so that doe started jumping back and forth, just easy. It was fantastic just watching the spring in their legs, and a lot of stuff like that I got to see, and I couldn't do it at home. One of our senators from New Mexico got to be a good friend, and he had my book, and he made that comment. It's good that somebody can stop and smell the roses, 'cause in the world that he lives in, it's just go, 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 people at each other's throats and stuff like that. You see the Pelham seals from here, they're dry and hot and rough, and they are that, but you get into them and they are beautiful. A lot of the old timers are dying off, and sometimes I feel selfish,
How do you mean?
Well,
I don't understand.
I'm still kicking,
Oh,
and a lot of my friends that have passed on were good people,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I don't know what it is, why I never expected to be over 60, to live over 60. And here I am,
Yeah.
yeah, 80 years old.